What an amazing woman my mother, Hilda Stern, was. I say was because we lost her just last month when she was a few days shy of her 97th birthday. I'll tell you a little of what made her so amazing and some of the lessons that she taught us, that she left for us and future generations. My mother was born to an upper middle class family in Germany in 1923. Her parents owned a successful jewelry shop. She attended a private Jewish school. As children, my brother and I had chores to do around the house, and years later my mother told us she sometimes felt bad making us do those things because she never had to. Her family had a maid. However, her life experience taught her that we had to be able to take care of ourselves and that no job was beneath us. At the age of 12, she had to leave her Jewish school. She and a few other girls, Jewish girls, had to sit at the back of the classroom and were snubbed by the other children. She was there until she was 15 when her formal education ended. That's how old she was in November of 1938 when the Nazis looted her family's store and kidnapped her father, took him to Sachsenhausen concentration camp on what is now known as the Night of the Broken Glass. By the time he came home looking thin and haggard, she was already registered to go on a children's transport to Holland. While there, she saw how some of the other children refused to eat and made sure that we learned to eat everything, try everything, finish everything. She wanted to be sure that we too could survive if we ever found ourselves in a similar situation. In May of 1939, she was able to rejoin her parents as they prepared to board the St. Louis ship bound for Cuba, where people were going to wait for their numbers to be called to enter the United States. It was leaving Hamburg, Germany, May 13th. It was full of German Jewish refugees. They were planning to wait in Cuba for entry. All fortunes were paid and appropriate bribes were made to the Cuban officials, all to no avail. They were not allowed into Cuba, and Franklin Roosevelt and the rest of the American government did not let them into the United States, even as a ship cruised around the coast of Florida. It ended up sailing back to Europe, where my parents disembarked in Holland and were sent to a camp called Westerbork. When the Germans took the camp over in 1941, things changed for the worse. The German shepherds and barbed wire fences were there to remind the Jews that they were no longer free. My mother was supposed to be on one of the first transports east, but her father used connections he had as a watchmaker to get her off of that list. January 18th, 1944, my mother and her parents left Westerbork, headed for Theresienstadt in Czechoslovakia. It was also known as Terezin. If you've ever seen the book, I Never Saw Another Butterfly, the poetry and art in that book is from children at Theresienstadt. It was also known as the camp that the International Red Cross visited in the summer of 1944. The Germans put on a show for the Red Cross, and the Red Cross representatives didn't find any problems there for some reason. Also in June of 1944, at the age of 21, my mother got married at Theresienstadt. At first, her parents thought she was too young, but then the two sets of parents agreed that Hilda and Adolf would have a better chance of surviving if they were together, if they were married. The marriage was short-lived, however, because in September of that year, he, his four brothers, his father, and her father were all shipped off to Auschwitz, never to be heard from again. When given the opportunity to follow her husband, my mother said she had the pen in her hand and she put it down and walked away. She had promised her father she would always take care of her mother and couldn't leave her then. It was one of the most difficult decisions she ever had to make. In May of 1945, my mother and grandmother were liberated by the Russians, along with the rest of the Theresienstadt survivors. Then the problem became where to go. The Allies wanted people to return to their home countries, but there was no way my mother and grandmother were going back to Germany. Instead, they boarded a freight train to Holland. That train was the first to cross some of the bridges that could have been booby-trapped. My mother always thought that people didn't care if the train blew up full of Jewish refugees, so what? She lived in Holland for 2 years while she waited for her turn to come to the United States. She didn't really want to come here because the United States rejected her in 1939, and really wanted to go to what was then Palestine, but knew she couldn't get her mother in. And again, she promised her father she would take care of her mother, so she came to the United States via freighter, 1947. When her two cousins picked her up in Hoboken, New Jersey, they took her for a bite to eat, and all she wanted was whipped cream because to her that represented freedom. In New York, she stayed with cousins until she found a room to rent with her mother, and that room was in an apartment rented by a German Jewish family. When their cousin came to visit, she met him. He became my father because they met Christmas Day, were engaged the day before New Year's Eve, and got married less than 2 months later in February of 1949. My parents lived in the Chicago area, Chicago, Evanston, Morton Grove, Glenview, ran a business together, and were happily married for 45 years when my father died. They took care of their mothers and raised and educated 2 children. They derived their greatest pleasure from their 5 grandchildren. My mother's dream had always been to go to Israel, and she finally got there. That's where she was for my father's first yard site. She taught us that if you want something bad enough, and you work hard enough and are patient, you can achieve your goals. In spite of all the horror my mother experienced at a young age, she was always an optimist. She was the most loving, caring, strong, emotionally and physically, wise person I ever knew. She always told us there was something good in everything bad. That's why I can say that as sad as we are to have lost her, she spared us the current inability to visit loved ones even in their final days due to the current pandemic. When she died, we were still able to visit after having our temperatures checked. In the current situation, she would tell us that sometimes we have to create that good. Although we must stay home, look how lucky we are to be able to enjoy the blessings of our families and our homes. Maybe we have to create that good ourselves by donating money or time to help fight the coronavirus or to fight anti-Semitism. Or maybe the good right now is that you have time to read a book or take up a craft. She enabled us to remember that because the most important mitzvah is preserving life, we could more easily handle having a funeral and no shiva for her. She taught us so much by example. We must honor our loved ones while they are alive. Don't wait for a funeral to tell people you love them. Tzedakah is such an important part of being Jewish. We must always give something if we are at all able. She knew from experience that being on the giving end is much better than being on the receiving end of charity. That's also why whenever my mother donated to a charity, if she donated used clothing, she made sure it was clean and did not need any mending. She knew how difficult it was to receive clothing only to discover that a button was missing or another repair was required. That's a problem when one has no money. She also told us that we have to take care of our fellow Jews because nobody else is going to. When I was growing up, we always made kiddush and had dinner in the dining room on Friday nights. My mother said memories of those Shabbat dinners growing up helped her survive. So my children also grew up with Shabbat dinners in the dining room on Friday night. That's an important tradition to maintain. She taught us that life isn't always fair and that when it strays from your plans or when you feel lost, you must not give up. Instead, create your own wonderful path. Turn lemons into lemonade. My mother provided strength and wisdom to teach our children and grandchildren. We must survive and care for one another. She proved that we can and will persevere even through the most difficult times. She always knew that something horrible could happen, even here in her beloved United States, and that we would need strength, wisdom, and love to get through it. As you light your Yom Hashoah candles in memory of the 6 million we lost so tragically, please use that moment to also celebrate the legacy of the survivors and all they have done for the world. My mother always said she was the luckiest person in the world. That's where she was wrong. My brother and I and our children are the luckiest people in the world to have had her as our mother and grandmother.
Hi, my name is Jeff, and my father, Jack Kostis, is a Holocaust survivor. He was a Holocaust survivor. He was born in 1934 in Greece and just died about 2.5 months ago. Not many people know that there was actually a pretty large Jewish community in Greece, so I want to give a little bit of background on what was there. Hitler invaded Greece in about 1941, so my dad was about 7 years old. He was still a pretty young child, but old enough to understand what was going on. He lived in Chalkida, which is a small community just north of Athens, about a 2-hour train ride, with his extended family. Chalkida had a pretty decent-sized Jewish community for its size, especially in Greece. His family owned a textile store before the war and employed both Jewish and non-Jewish employees. His immediate family, once Hitler invaded, kind of scattered all around Greece. So some of his family stayed in Chalkida, some went to Athens, some went to the mountains to hide, some left the country. Fortunately for us, none of his family was captured or sent to a concentration camp. There were a lot of things I think that were important to my father about this time and the larger picture as well. And probably the biggest one, the biggest important element was how important it is for us to remember the stories of the survivors and those that didn't survive, so we know and can understand some of the horrors that they went through. When I was growing up, my father really could not talk much about the war, his survival, what happened. It's only been the last few years that he's been able to do that. A few years ago, he actually made some recordings for his grandchildren to listen to, but only after he passed away. Unfortunately for us right now, he hid them, and they're still somewhere in my mom's house, and we're looking for them. I know that one of his proudest moments was last year when Beth Judea's Hay class asked him to talk to his grandson's Hay class about what happened to him and his survival in World War II and during the Holocaust. It was the first time even I heard many of the details. Even my mom didn't know a lot of what happened. So it was very special for all of us. And I know it was something he really wanted to do again this year, but he passed before he was able to do that. I think there were a lot of things he wanted me to learn. One of those is the importance of family, and you just have to do whatever you have to do for your family. Second, I think it was also very important for him to pass on to both me and his grandsons and my sister and family how important it is to be part of the Jewish community wherever you live, the importance of the state of Israel, so the Jews would always have a safe place to be. It's also important to care about Jewish people all over the world, in all communities around the world. My father saw a lot of anti-Semitism in his life, both after the war, immediately after in Greece, and after he came to the United States. And I know that understanding anti-Semitism was very important for him. And knowing that it's my duty to do whatever I need to do to survive. It's all of our duties as Jews to do that. And if you have to bend or break some rules, do things you don't want to do, it's all okay. And what matters is that you survive. I guess in closing, I don't think he'd ever admit it, but I think he was very proud that I care about our responsibilities for those in the world that are less fortunate and face a lot of bigotry, a lot of racism, and the threat of persecution on a daily basis. And it's not just for Jewish people that we're worried about this for. It's all people around the world, regardless of their race, color, religion, so forth. Thank you for listening.
Eshkachech Yerushalayim Tishkach Yemini.
First, thanks to Rabbi Zimbalist and Arnie for asking my brothers or me to speak at this Yom Hashoah service. It's an honor that we don't take lightly. Thank you very much. At first, I thought I would share our experiences growing up as children of survivors. In thinking about it, I don't think that our home was reflective of many children of survivors. Our parents didn't allow the horrors of the past to come into our present. And for that, Mark, David, and I thank you. We are grateful. We salute you, Mom and Dad. There were so many questions. How did you cope? Where did you find strength to start all over again? How did you stay sane? So many questions. So I thought, who better than Elie Wiesel to reflect on a couple of these questions. A while ago, I was intrigued by the title of a book by Howard Reich, a child of survivors, The Art of Inventing Hope. It was a conversation with Elie Wiesel, so I thought I would read some excerpts from that book. How could our parents stay sane? Wiesel said that they had to reinvent a new way of thinking about the reality around them. They had to somehow establish a kind of mental order amid mayhem. It simply tells us that we are stronger than we think, Wiesel said. And then he quoted a French poet who said, "Actually, I am so weak that any pebble can kill me," recalled Wiesel. "But as long as I breathe, I am immortal." How did our parents not want revenge? Survivors obviously overcame unbelievable hardships, but an equal triumph was how they answered barbarity with civility. Revenge, said Wiesel, is not the Jewish way. There was something noble in our quest to show that we remain human, we remain civilized, religious if we were, or anti-religious if we became, but simply human. How have we survived anti-Semitism of the ages? Wiesel cited his first meeting with the Dalai Lama. "Teach us the art of survival," Wiesel recalled the Dalai Lama saying to him. "After all, you, the Jews, left the homeland 2,000 years ago, and with everything that has happened to you, you are still here." Wiesel told the Dalai Lama that Jews prevailed for various reasons, but the first one really is that when other people left their homelands, they took money, they took jewels with them. But when we left ours, we took one little thing, a book, a small book. But that book produced thousands and thousands of other books, and it is our attachment to that book that explains Jews' survival in the face of unrelenting genocide, said Wiesel. So I think I'll end with that. Thanks for letting me speak. Be well, stay safe, and I hope I've given you some nuggets to ponder.
Eshkachech Yerushalayim Tishkach Yemini Tzibach L'shoni Lechiki
Avinu, Avinu, שבשמיים, to Yisrael וגורלו, Avinu, Avinu, שבשמיים, to Yisrael וגורלו. Borei, es Medinas Yisrael, Reiche Yismichat Gelolteinu, Avinu, Avinu, שבשמיים, to Yisrael וגורלו. חזק, 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 אשדי המגינה ארץ קודשנו. חבבסי, אשדי המגינה ארץ קודשנו. והנחליים אלינו ישוע, ותרס נצרו תתריים, ונתתו שלום בארץ, ושמרס אוילום ישוביה, ונהומה, 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 Amen.
Avinu Shevashamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people of Israel, bless the state of Israel, that it may be the beginning of our redemption. That shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace, guide its leaders and advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy, and let us say, Amen.
Yerushalayim, Arosh Simchati, Ayayati Bavushani Lechiki, Imlo Eskerechi, Imlo Ale et Yerushalayim. Arosh Simchati.